The call came through the car speakers before she could think to reach over and disconnect it. Neva sat in the passenger seat, hands loose in her lap. Daniel had stepped out at a rest stop somewhere outside Savannah, walked around to the side of the building, said he'd be right back. She'd watched him go. She wasn't worried. She wasn't anxious about meeting his parents. Or she hadn't been, until his phone lit up on the center console and his brother Bryce's name appeared on the screen. And the car's Bluetooth connected the call automatically before she understood what was happening. "Hey, where are you?" Bryce's voice came through flat and clear from the dashboard speakers. Outside the car, she could see Daniel appearing from around the corner of the building. Phone pressed to his ear. Through the windshield, she watched his mouth move. She'd gotten good at reading lips over the past 18 months, better than she ever wanted to be. He was saying something she couldn't parse from that angle. Then he turned slightly, and she caught it. "She's fine. She's in the car." "You ready for today?" Bryce asked. "Mom's been cooking since yesterday morning." Daniel laughed. Short, a pause. "I think so." "You think so?" He walked a few steps away from the building, turned his back to the car. She couldn't see his face anymore, but she could still hear him. The Bluetooth was still open. "She's not always easy, Bryce. I love her. You know I do." He stopped walking. "But I think about the next 10 years, and I don't know what it looks like. Every restaurant, every event, I'm running the whole checklist first. Where's the noise level? Where can she sit so she can read the room? What happens when her battery dies and she just goes quiet in the middle of a conversation, and I have to cover for her without making it obvious? I get tired." Bryce didn't say anything. "I hate that I get tired," Daniel said, "but I do." Neva looked down at her hands. They were very still. "Are you sure you want to bring her home today?" Bryce asked. Daniel was silent long enough that she started to count. 1, 2, 3, 4. "I don't know," he said. "That's the honest answer." Through the windshield, she watched him turn. He looked at the car. He couldn't see her face from that distance, probably couldn't read anything in it. She kept her expression flat. She'd had practice at that too. He noticed the call display on the dashboard screen. Ended it from outside. She watched him tap the button, and then he came back and got in and put 2 bottles of water in the center console, next to his now dark phone. "Sorry about that." Bryce just checking in. He started the engine. "You okay?" "Fine," she said. She reached over and turned off the navigation. He looked at her. "What are you?" "Don't take me to your parents' house." Her voice came out even. She was surprised by that. "Take me to the ocean instead." Daniel looked at her for a moment. Then he put the car in drive. He didn't know how much she'd heard. She knew everything she needed to. 18 months before that afternoon, Neva had been driving home from the middle school where she taught music. It was a Tuesday in November, 4:15, low light cutting horizontal across the road. She remembered the song on the radio because she'd laughed at it, some old Motown thing she'd heard 1,000 times, and she'd been singing along. She didn't remember the impact. She remembered waking up to a sound like television static, loud and close, and then gradually understanding it was coming from inside her own head. The car that ran the red light hit the driver's side. Her right eardrum ruptured on impact. The left sustained nerve damage. She spent 4 days in the hospital, and the next 8 months learning to live inside a world that had gone muffled and strange on one side and completely silent on the other. The hearing aid in her left ear gave back maybe 60% of what she'd lost. The right ear never came back. She couldn't return to the classroom. 28 11-year-olds in a room with tile floors and high ceilings, the echo alone made it impossible to process what anyone was saying. Her audiologist said it might improve with time. Her principal held her position for a semester. By the end of that semester, Neva knew improvement wasn't coming fast enough. She taught herself to sew properly during the months she spent at home. She'd always been decent at basic alterations, but there was nothing else to do with her hands, so she got better. She started taking in work from neighbors, then from a dry cleaner 2 streets over who began referring clients. She set up a work table in the second bedroom, pulled the curtains back to get the light, and worked most mornings in silence. The piano in her living room stayed closed. Her neighbor Jess lived 3 houses down and brought meals more often than necessary. She had a habit of knocking and opening the door in the same motion, which drove Neva slightly crazy, but she'd given up saying anything about it. "You need to get out more," Jess told her one afternoon, setting a container of soup on the counter. "Not for errands, I mean existing in the world." I exist in the world, Neva said. You exist in this house. She wasn't wrong. Neva knew she wasn't wrong. But the world was louder than people understood, and she was navigating it without all of her equipment. And sometimes the gap between what she could hear and what she could tell she was missing made public spaces feel like standing in a room where everyone else could see a step she couldn't. She met Daniel in April, 10 months after the accident, when he knocked on her door with a blazer over one arm and a look like a man who had run out of options. My neighbor said you do alterations, he said. I've got a wedding in 2 weeks and this thing doesn't fit the way it used to. He was tall and had the look of someone who'd recently lost weight, which explained the jacket. She opened the door wider and let him in. He was polite about standing still while she measured. He didn't fill the silence the way some clients did, chattering to cover the awkwardness of being pinned by a stranger. He just stood there and looked at her wall of spools, at the quilt folded on the shelf, at the framed concert program she'd hung from her first time seeing a real orchestra. Who was playing? He asked, nodding toward the frame. The Atlanta Symphony, she said. I was 19. You like music? I used to teach it, middle school band and choir. He didn't ask anything else about it. When he came back to pick up the jacket, he told her he managed projects for a construction firm. She told him she hadn't left the house for anything except appointments in about 2 months. She wasn't sure why she said that. He didn't say I'm sorry, which she appreciated. He nodded like she'd said something ordinary. If you ever want company going somewhere, he said, I don't have much going on most weekends. She thought about it for 3 days before she texted him. They fell into something gradually and without ceremony. He came over on Saturdays and sat in the kitchen while she worked. He learned not to stand behind her where she couldn't see his face, and he learned that if she didn't respond, it wasn't rudeness. It was geometry. She had to see his mouth to fully catch what he was saying. He learned these things without making them into lessons, without visibly studying her, and she was more grateful for that than she knew how to say. In November, exactly 1 year after the accident, he asked her what she missed most. She was at the work table trimming a seam. He was on the couch with a book, which was how most of their evenings went. Playing the piano, she said. I haven't touched it since the accident. I can't hear myself the way I used to, and it makes me feel like I'm doing something wrong when I know I'm not. He didn't say you should try again. He said, what else? The ocean. I was supposed to take a trip to the coast the weekend after the accident. Family thing. We never rescheduled it. And? She glanced at the quilt on the shelf. My sister Lila got married 14 months ago. I'd been working on a quilt for her wedding gift, had been at it for 6 months when the accident happened. It was about 2/3 done. She paused. She got married without it. It's still sitting there. Do you want to finish it? I don't know. Every time I look at it, I think about where I was when the accident happened. That Tuesday, I was driving home thinking about what stitching to do on the border. He looked at the quilt for a moment. Then he went back to his book. He didn't say you should do it anyway. He just let her be done talking about it. She didn't know why she'd told him all of that. He was becoming the person she told things to. She wasn't entirely sure when that had happened. In December, he left something at her door before she was awake, a small record player, used but clean, and a vinyl copy of Bolero, the Ravel piece she'd been teaching her students the week of the accident. No note. She didn't play it for 4 days. On the 5th day, she put it on alone in the morning and sat on the couch and let it run through. It sounded different than she remembered. Not because the recording was different, but because her hearing was. The balance was off, more on the left, the right side of everything thinned out. She sat for an hour after it ended, then she called Jess. Come over, she said. Are you okay? I don't know yet. Come over anyway. The first time a client was openly rude to her about it, Daniel was in the room. The man had come to pick up an altered dress shirt. He was in a hurry. She asked him to repeat something. She'd only caught the end of his sentence, and he exhaled through his nose and said, How are you supposed to run a business if you can't even hear? She started to answer. Daniel said from the doorway, She alters clothing, not conversations. His voice was flat and final. You got your shirt back on time and it fits. Pay her and go. The man paid. He left without another word. She turned back to the work table. She didn't want to make it into a thing. Daniel sat down on the stool near the door and didn't say anything. You didn't have to do that, she said. I know. I handle it. I know you do. She kept cutting. After a while, she said, "Thank you." He nodded once. They were together almost 8 months before she started noticing the pattern. It began small. He rearranged the furniture near her work table without asking, said it was better for the light. She let it go. He researched restaurants before they made plans and presented a single option, quieter than the others, he said. She let that go too. When she mentioned going to the Saturday market alone, he found a reason to come along. The third time he offered to drive her to a standing appointment she'd been handling independently for a year, she looked up from her work and said, "I take the bus." "I know, but I've been taking the bus to that clinic since before we met." He backed off. But a month later, she found out he'd turned down a 6-month assignment in Charleston. His colleague called while his phone was on the counter and she'd picked it up by mistake. She heard a man ask if Daniel had changed his mind about the Low Country project. She told the man she'd have Daniel call back. When Daniel came home, she asked. "I turned it down 3 weeks ago," he said. "It's fine." "You didn't tell me." "It wasn't a big deal." She set down what was in her hands. 6 months is a big deal. "I didn't want to leave you for that long." "Did you ask me what I thought?" He didn't answer. "I could have arranged things," she said. "Jess helps when you're not available. I could have hired someone for heavier deliveries. I'm not sitting here waiting for you to come home every night so I can function." "I know that." "Do you?" He looked at her. She watched something move across his face that she couldn't read clearly. "I just didn't want to be hours away if something happened." "Something like what?" He didn't answer that either. They moved on from it. But she carried something from that conversation she hadn't been preparing for. Like a stone she'd picked up without meaning to. She fell in late January, on a Saturday morning when she was alone. Her hearing aid battery had died, and she hadn't noticed until she was reaching for her towel in the bathroom, misjudged the edge of the counter, and her hand slipped. She went down hard onto the tile, hip catching the cabinet on the way. She lay there a few minutes taking inventory. Nothing broken, phone in the other room. She got herself up. It took a while. When Daniel found out that afternoon, he moved the stool, repositioned the shelf, holding her spare batteries closer to the mirror, and said from the doorway, "I don't think you should be here alone on the days Jess can't check in." She looked at him. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means someone should be here." "Someone is here, me." "Neva. I've been managing this house alone for 18 months. You fell. And I got up," she said. "That's not nothing." He left the shelf where he'd moved it and didn't say anything else about it. But after that day, every time he left for work, he paused in the doorway a beat too long. When she didn't answer a text within 20 minutes, he called to check. She started to feel the shape of what was happening. A room slowly getting smaller, so gradually she almost didn't notice until she was already backed into the corner. The trip to his parents had been his idea. He'd been building toward it for weeks. She'd agreed because she wanted to. Because after 8 months she thought she knew what they were building together. Because she'd started to think the stone she was carrying might just dissolve over time if she was patient enough. She brought a book in her bag out of habit. He'd found a marine education center on the way, accessible paths, wide doorways, tanks full of fish. He'd remembered from some conversation months earlier that she'd mentioned wanting to see a school of fish in real water, not a tank at the market. She was surprised he'd held on to that. The gate was locked, a paper sign read, "Temporarily closed for repairs, reopening date TBD." "I'm sorry," he said. The website still had them listed as open. "It's fine," she said. She didn't say what she was thinking, which was that she was collecting these. The trip to Charleston that never happened, a concert rained out last fall, the quilt in the drawer, the piano with the lid still down. Things that kept living in the future because the future stayed available until it suddenly didn't. She got back in the car. At the rest stop, she sat with her hands in her lap and watched the dashboard screen go dark after Bryce's name left it. She looked out the windshield, flat gray sky, bare trees at the edge of the parking lot, Daniel walking back toward the car with 2 bottles of water, arranging his face into something ordinary. "She's fine. She's in the car." She turned off the navigation. He looked at her. "Take me to the ocean," she said. He looked at her a moment longer. "Neva, did you?" "I just want to see the water." He drove to Tybee Island without asking anything else. The beach was mostly empty in January, strong wind off the water, cold that got into her teeth. She stood on the paved path above the sand and looked at the water, gray and wide and moving without stopping. Daniel stood next to her. He didn't say anything. She said, "I heard what you told Bryce through the speakers." He turned toward her. "I know you didn't mean for that," she said, "but I heard it." He didn't try to explain it away. She was grateful for that. She'd braced for him to reach for a reason. "It was the honest answer," she said. "You said that yourself, that you didn't know. I believe you meant it." "Neva, I'm not angry." She kept her eyes on the water. "I know what it costs you. The planning, the checking, covering for me in conversations, all of it. I know it costs you." She paused. "But I don't want to be the thing someone is tired of, even someone who loves me." "You're not." "I know you don't mean it that way." She finally looked at him. "That almost makes it harder." He stood there. She watched him look for something his hands could do, and find nothing. "I don't know what to say," he said finally. "I know." She put her hands in her coat pockets. "I think that's sort of the answer." They drove back to Savannah in the late afternoon. He carried her bag to the door without being asked. He set it on the step. "Give me some time," he said. "I can fix." "Daniel." She looked at him steadily. "I spent 18 months learning that I can't wait for a world that's more convenient. I'm not going to spend the next 10 years being someone's hesitation." He held her gaze, nodded slowly, like he was absorbing weight he'd been carrying at the wrong angle. She watched him drive away, went inside, sat in the quiet for a while. The quilt came out of the drawer the following Saturday. She spread it across the work table, 2/3 done exactly as she'd left it. The double wedding ring pattern in deep blue and cream, and a dark rust she'd chosen because Leela loved rust. The center section's finished. What remained was the border and the binding. She sat down and threaded a needle. She didn't think about the accident. She thought about the pattern. Where the next piece went, how to ease the curve without puckering, how the colors needed to balance in the corners. These were the only questions that mattered right now. She could answer all of them. It took 3 weeks. When she finished, she called Lila. "Can I come over?" "Of course. Is everything okay?" "Yes," Neva said. "I finished your quilt." Lila went quiet on the other end. "Then I'll make dinner." In March, she called the concert hall about their spring series. The main hall would be too much. She knew that going in. But there was a chamber ensemble performing in a small auxiliary room at the end of the month. 40 seats. Low ceiling. Close enough to the stage that she'd be in the first 2 rows. She bought 1 ticket. She sat on the left side of the front row, close enough to feel the bow on the strings through the air. The hearing aid did what it did, gave her 60% of it, the left side richer than the right, the balance not quite even. But there was something she hadn't anticipated. She could feel the cello through the floor. She could feel the lower register move through her chest, the way the water at Tybee had. Not through her ears, but through her whole body, which knew how to receive it, even when her eardrums couldn't process all of it. She sat with her hands in her lap and let it come. The ocean she went to alone on a Thursday in April. She booked an accessible ride, brought Lila's quilt rolled under one arm to use on the sand, wore her better hearing aid and a wool hat that sat low over her ears. The driver asked if she needed help to the water. She said, no. She walked down to the shoreline by herself, spread the quilt on the dry sand above the tide line, and sat facing the Atlantic. It showed up for her the same as it had in January, gray and wide and further than the eye could follow to the horizon, more than the books had described, and also exactly right. She hadn't needed anyone to carry her here. She had her own legs, she'd had them all along. She stayed until the light began to shift, and the color in the water changed from gray to something almost green at the edges. Then she folded the quilt, gathered herself, and walked back up to the road. In May, on a quiet Thursday morning with no orders due and no files open, Neva walked into the living room and lifted the lid of the piano. It was out of tune, more than she'd expected. She pressed middle C and it landed flat, a little wrong. She sat down anyway. She placed both hands on the keys. The balance in her hearing was not what it had been before that Tuesday in November, and it was not what it would have been at 19 in the concert hall with the orchestra. She would always hear more on the left. The right side of a chord would always be a little thinner, a little further away, like a word caught at the edge of a crowded room that you almost make out but not quite. She played C major, then G, then F. She adjusted as she went. She was learning this instrument again from a slightly different angle, the way she'd learned the bus route and the market and the concert hall, not the way she'd known them before. But well enough. More than well enough. She played for 40 minutes without stopping. Not perfectly. Not the way she'd played before the accident, before the static and the silence and the long months of adapting to a world that had changed its shape on her without warning. But she was here, sitting at her own piano in her own house, hearing what she could hear and feeling the rest of it through the keys and the bench and the floor beneath her feet. The three things she'd said she wanted. The quilt finished, the ocean seen, the music let back in. She'd reached all of them, not the way she'd imagined she might, not with someone beside her at every step. On her own. Which, it turned out, was the only way they'd ever really been hers to reach. She played until her hands were tired. Then she stopped and sat for a moment with her palms resting flat on the closed keys. Then she got up and went to start the rest of her day.